Daniel 5, writing on the wall. So, of course, we're talking Babylon the Mighty here. This is the nation that had been in existence for 1,000 years. It had reached its zenith, its peak, under these last kings here, set up by Nebuchadnezzar. It was the power of the world. And we shall see that this is the area that they were covering over. Really, everyone paid homage to the king, including the Egyptians, the Hittites, the Medes at the time. All were in homage to this great king, this great nation of Babylon. And of course, this is the first kingdom on that great metallic statue of 5 kingdoms that was shown in Daniel chapter's 2 dream. So, and this, of course, the 3 is from the study the other last week, in which we discussed the 7 heads being 7 kingdoms. So, just wanted to show you the geographic region, and of course, Jerusalem was within that. And in that time, of course, was the 70-year Babylonian captivity that occurred, and it was still ongoing in chapter 5. Here is the family of Nebuchadnezzar II. Nebuchadnezzar died in 562. So we have this discussion here that occurs in chapters 1 through 4, where we see the turmoil that occurs. This Nebuchadnezzar is in charge. And then we jump over here to chapter 5, and that's where we have Nabonidus and as well as Belshazzar. And these individuals, I don't agree with this time. In fact, Nabonidus lives past Belshazzar, but this just is showing the lineage of the people. So we will see that Nebuchadnezzar's daughter married this man, and he became king, Nabonidus. And they had a grandson, and his name was Belshazzar. Now, oftentimes you'll see the doubters in history saying, that person never showed up in any record anywhere. You got to remember, the Babylonians didn't write things on paper. They had clay tablets they put everything on. Mud was common in the area, so they had this stylistic form of a reed, and they would write down everything in cuneiform. So they wrote on this cylinder. This was found, and this cylinder that they found in an archaeological site, the stipple of the Shamash at Samur in Iraq, and it told of King Nabonidus. And this is an actual writing, and it includes the name of Belshazzar, thus confirming the identity of the kings in Daniel 5:1 as legitimate. This is something from that age. It confirms Belshazzar, and it says Nabonidus was the son co-regent, which is what the Bible says, and it explains why Daniel could raise himself to no higher than number 3 in the kingdom, which is all right out of the Bible. If they would have just gone with the Bible to begin with, it has saved them a lot of time. But anyway, I think it's fascinating when they have archaeological finds that backs up exactly what the Bible says. Now, this is a little bit of background as we discuss what is going to occur in chapter 5, which is the siege of Babylon is going on right now. We're going to find a scene where we have 1,000 lords are gathered together in Babylon. Why? Why would 1,000 lords gather together in Babylon? And that's what the city of Babylon. That's what we have to ask. But you see this huge river that runs right down the middle of the city. Again, we had a discussion of the walls were the most immense at that time. You could actually ride chariots and a race on top of their walls. They were considered impregnable at the time. And again, sieges at this time would last years and years. They didn't have any means of destroying those walls except for rolling up to these walls with battering rams. Now, they could shoot catapults, But the catapults were of limited value until they developed the trebuchet in the Middle Ages, which would hurl these rocks, hundreds and hundreds of pounds and smash the walls. They didn't have that technology, so they had to build what they call a mole, a ramp up to the wall, so where they can batter the heck out of it. The whole time they were doing that, people were shooting them with arrows, trying to kill them or pour boiling oil on them or heave rocks at them to keep them from breaking these walls down. So these people, the reason I'm saying that, they're setting in this area in Babylon feeling pretty darn secure. But we're going to see something's about to occur to them that is unanticipated by anybody but God and the armies of Cyrus. Okay, any questions before we end that and go on to our reading for this evening? Okay, we will now move in to our next study. Chapter 5, the writing on the wall. Belshazzar is Nebuchadnezzar's grandson. We've already discussed that, but it's important for us to know the sequencing here so where we can see, really get a picture of what's happened. Though it says Belshazzar's father is Nebuchadnezzar, the Hebrew word for father and grandfather is one and the same. So you really have to know what they're talking about to gain further knowledge into that. So the King James Version translators chose father, but the lineage was actually Nebuchadnezzar, Nabonidus, and Belshazzar. And we saw the family lineage there. We saw in the cylinder that there's proof that that is exactly what the lineage was. We see this prophesied in Jeremiah 27, 4b through 7. Someone read that, please. Next reader.
This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Tell this to your masters. With my great power and outstretched arm, I made the earth and its people and the animals that are on it, and I give it to anyone I please. Now I will hand all your countries over to my servant Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. I will make even the wild animals subject to him. All nations will serve him, and his son and his grandson, until the time for his land comes. Then many nations and great kings will subjugate him.
Interesting that this was prophesied before Nebuchadnezzar even went and destroyed the kingdom of Judah, capital of Jerusalem, and the temple of Solomon. It says, all nations will serve him, his son, and his grandson. So it really is giving a bracket there that's going to happen for this kingdom, this head of gold that is going to occur. And Jeremiah does this. And we'll get a time frame of when this was before he actually went and conquered. Now here is a little bit more on Nabonidus. His name means Nabu, be exalted, or exalt him. He's named after Nabu, the god of thriving in the Babylonian pantheon. He is the son-in-law of Nebuchadnezzar. This is really the last Babylonian king who ruled, and his rule ended on 539 BC. His son, Belshazzar, his name means Bel protect the king. That didn't happen too good. Oh, Bel didn't do a job on this one, did he? Bel is another name for Marduk. Now, Bel is kind of like a title like Lord, but it's not specific. But when you said Lord in Babylon, he was the leader of the pantheon, and he was in charge over all the gods. He was the supreme god of the nation, and specifically the city of Babylon. And he was the co-reigner with his father. Now, why is that? Why would his father allow him to co-reign with him? Well, if you go back and read, I was reading the history of Babylon, and you'll find out that Nabonidus was a religious man. And he did not necessarily believe that in Marduk as much as many others. In fact, he went on a pilgrimage, and he stayed in another region of the country worshiping a god down there. Now that really concerned the priests who really run things. We saw that with the Chaldeans. They were concerned that they're going to take power and influence away from this king. So when he was gone, he set his son up as co-regent so he could go off and do his religious quest So he was more of a man of poetry and arts and religion. And that's why he kind of had this co-regent thing going on. And again, Babylon is the center of power. You don't leave Babylon if you're the king for a long period of time, because the political intrigue there was just too great. So here we have this soft king, so to speak, taking his pilgrimage down to what he considered a holy place, and he left his son home alone. Okay, now remember that for the future. We're going to get into a little more prophecy on this period of time. Next reader, we're going to read Jeremiah 25:11, and after that, next reader after that, Jeremiah 51:7. The prophet Jeremiah foretold of Babylon's desolation. Next reader, please.
And this whole land shall be a desolation and an astonishment, and these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. And it shall come to pass, when 70 years are accomplished, that I will punish the king of Babylon and that nation, saith the Lord, for their iniquity, and the land of the Chaldeans, and will make it perpetual desolations.
Now, that wasn't the Deans. That was the Chaldeans. Yeah, so don't take that wrong. No, you said it right. I was just going, you said Deans. I know you. Anyway, that's their family name, so I just couldn't leave it alone. Poor jokes are my forte. So again, this is a critical part. This 70 years is a critical part of the chastisement of Israel, the Babylonian captivity. And during that time, their destroyer of, the kingdom of Judah, Jerusalem, the first temple, they had to live within that kingdom during that amount of time. But look at how swiftly it ends for Babylon. Perpetual desolation is what is told is coming to that city as far as its dominance in the world. That head of gold will fall. Next reading, Jeremiah 51:7.
Babylon hath been a golden cup in the Lord's hand, that made all the earth drunken. The nations have drunken of her wine, therefore the nations are mad. Babylon is suddenly fallen and destroyed. Howl for her, take balm for her pain, if so she may be healed. We would have healed Babylon, but she is not healed. Forsake her, and let us go every one into his own country, for her judgment reacheth unto heaven, and is lifted up even to the skies.
So this describes this nation that is so powerful. Everyone has to kowtow, bow down to this nation on the earth. And they are drunken with the influences of her trade and her power. And they are made mad by her. Meaning they're taking whatever bad influences that she has, and they're becoming part of their society. They're being polluted. They're being prostituted to this great Babylonian power. And she suddenly falls. And listen to that. Howl for her. Take balm for her pain, as if she might be healed. So this is going to be painful for these people, that they're going to endure this. And her judgment reaches onto heaven and is lifted up to the sky. So many people are crying, how long, O Lord, are we going to have to endure Babylon? And the Jews were saying this. Daniel, when he went and prayed every day, 3 times a day, was asking that. And we shall see that he is going to turn to this passage when we get further into Daniel. He is going to remember what Jeremiah says. And then in chapter 9, he's going to get his answer. How long? Isn't it great how how the Bible all ties together? Just awesome. Okay, and the prophet Isaiah, who I misspelled, foretold a new great king that will come. And the next reader, please read this whole section, Isaiah 44:28 through, and it goes into the next chapter of 45 through 45 down to 3, please.
That saith of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and shall perform all my pleasure, even saying to Jerusalem, thou shalt be built, and to the temple thy foundation shall be laid. Thus saith the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have holden, to subdue nations before him. And I will loose the loins of kings, to open before him the two lead gates, and the gates shall not be shut. I will go before thee, and make the crooked places straight. I will break in pieces the gates of brass, and cut in sunder the bars of iron. And I will give thee the treasures of darkness, and hidden riches of secret places, that thou mayest know that I, the Lord, which called thee by thy name, am the God of Israel.
Now this is fantastic when you consider, this prophecy was written about Cyrus, and this will be fulfilled this very night that we're going to see in chapter 5. To these details about the gates, the details about the iron bars that were submerged under the city wall. I mean, it's just fascinating. And all the treasuries that were, emptied of this great city. And a little bit more on this next king that will come, a king who would end the Babylonian exile and restore Israel, Jerusalem. And so let's read in Ezra 1:1, and then we're going to jump, or 1:1 through 1:2, and then we're going to also jump to Ezra 1:7. I'm just trying to pluck out these pieces, wonderful pieces, and sew them all together. So next reader, please read all that.
Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and put it also in writing, saying, Thus saith Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord God of heaven hath given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he hath charged me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Also Cyrus the king brought forth the vessels of the house of the Lord, which Nebuchadnezzar had brought forth out of Jerusalem, and had put them in the house of his gods.
Now we're going to talk about these vessels tonight. These were first taken, of course, when the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar destroyed Solomon's temple. So it's got come full circle. The reason I'm showing this now is because God has a plan. God uses the mightiest kings and kingdoms to deal with the Jewish people and the land of Jerusalem, the land of Israel, promised land, and the capital city of Jerusalem. He used Nebuchadnezzar, and though we're not going to see his name tonight, these are the forces of Cyrus the Great of Medo-Persia, and they're enacting the will that's shown in the prophecy. So this is just fantastic stuff, the scriptural fulfillment that we're going to read about tonight. And again, when we look at this, we have to realize this is not the judgment of one man, Belshazzar, but this is a judgment upon Babylon and all she had become, and all the evil that existed in that city and that system that she set up, and these Chaldean priests that were in charge. This is that first great empire of Nebuchadnezzar's great metallic statue. That head of gold, Babylon, would now be destroyed by the silver-shouldered empire of King Cyrus of Medo-Persia. So this is the culminating event in history at that time for, decades. And we're looking back on this, thousands of years later. And this is a pivotal point in history. And God's hand is literally all over this. All right, so let's read now from Daniel 5:1 through 4. Reader, please read all that.
Belshazzar the king made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords, and drank wine before the 1,000. Belshazzar, while he tasted the wine, commanded to bring the golden and silver vessels which his father Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple which was in Jerusalem, that the king and his princes, his wives and his concubines, might drink therein. Then they brought the golden vessels that were taken out of the temple to the house of God, which was at Jerusalem. And the king and his princes and his wives and his concubines drank in them. They drank
Now, we've had a little history, saw what the significance of this was, and the significance of this will be. So here we have the grandson is now in charge, and while his father is away, he's throwing the biggest house trashing party the Bible records. I think it's a humdinger. He's got 1,000 drunks, people drinking there. Now, why again are they there? They're in, and I'll get to this in a minute. I'll read what I have, and then I'll embellish after that. This is an intentional act of arrogance and desecration by this young king. I have no doubt he knows what he's doing. You know, you don't just say, get all that stuff from the temple and bring it over here. He obviously knew what he was doing. He was shaking his fist at the God of Daniel, the God of the Jews that was there. He had probably heard his grandfather in these proclamations and declarations declaring this God. And he had other people feeding him his whole youth, telling him how wrong it was and how their gods were the gods. So he was here in front of these lords and ladies of the Babylonian Empire, despite their land. Now get this, they weren't just sitting here and having a party. Let's just have a party. Their whole land at this time was being overran by the medieval Persian armies. They weren't here for fun. They were here because they were sequestered. They were inside the city that was being sieged. So he had brought all the lords who would probably be killed if they were in a battle, and there were probably battles beforehand. But he drew all the men here and said, come within the palace walls. Come in here and I will protect you. Come in here and we will last this siege out. And they were showing how boastful and proud they were because they were having a feast. And you only have a feast in the time of plenty. So here they were, and they knew they were going to be sieged. They had so much food. They had so much wine. They had an unending supply of water with the Euphrates River running right through there, that they were thumbing their noses at Cyrus the Great and his army. They were saying, come and get us. We have nothing to fear. We're safe behind our walls. You ever there? You ever safe behind your walls? It's where no one can get you. You got the ADT system on there. You got your shotgun by your bed. You ready for handling anything?
It only lasts for a while.
It provides a modicum of security. That's a good thing that being out in the country, you know everyone else has got guns. So someone would be foolish to go to someone's house around here because everybody's loaded for bear or coyotes. And there's a lot of coyotes around, I'm hearing, this time of year. Anyway, now these vessels, back to the vessels. These vessels are sacred, meaning they are set aside for God's purposes. They're not holy because of them being of themselves, because, it's just a piece of gold, just a piece of silver. But God is the one who makes them holy, and he set these up as holy vessels to be used in the services of the first temple. The temple priests were also called sacred because they had a role within the worship of God. And we too are told that we're sacred, not because we're anything special or wonderful, but because who we are in relationship to God and what Christ has done for us. He has sanctified us. He has set us aside for his greater purposes. We need to keep that in mind. Not that we're perfect because of what we are, but what Christ did for us. So notice the number of gods praised here. There's 6 of them. That's, of course, the number of man. Man was created on the 6th day. So 6 is the number of man, and that's why, 666 is the number of man. You'll see that is the number of the beast. Notice the end times parallels which occurred in this 6 things that are worshiped. Someone read here the end times parallel which occurs mid-tribulation. Into what is being worshipped? Someone read Revelations 9, 20 and 21 here, please. I'll move it to the top.
He thought, I can see that.
Right here is where it starts, right up here. Revelation 9:20, where I moved my cursor.
And the rest of the men which were not killed by these plagues, yet repented not of the works of their hands, that they shall not worship devils and idols of gold and silver and brass and stone and of wood, which neither can see nor hear nor walk. Neither repented they of their murders, nor of their sorceries, nor of their fornication, nor of their thefts.
Now notice here, there's 6 things to worship as well. One of them is devils, and then you have gold, silver, brass, stone, and wood. So, has anything changed that much since the time of worship in Babylon? They were worshiping 6 gods. We just have 6 gods. Man will create gods to worship rather than worship the God creator of the universe. So, in Revelations, God's dealing with the same thing. These people are rebelling in their drunkenness, worshiping all these gods. In Revelation, during the midst of these plagues that are coming, they're going to be worshiping different gods too. It's interesting. Man does not change that much. God is still dealing with the same issues as he did at this time 2,600 years ago. All right, any other thoughts before we move on? Okay, let's, next reader, please read Daniel 5. 5 through 9, please.
In the same hour came forth fingers of a man's hand, and wrote it over against the candlestick on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote, and the king's countenance was changed, and his thoughts troubled him, so that the joints of his loins were loosened, and his knees smote one against another. The king cried aloud to bring in the astrologers, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers. And the king spake and said to the wise men of Babylon, Whosoever shall read this writing and show me the interpretation thereof shall be clothed with scarlet, and have a chain of gold around his neck, and shall be the 3rd ruler in the kingdom. Then came in all the king's wise men, and they could not read the writing, nor make known to the king the interpretation thereof. Then was King Belshazzar greatly troubled, and his countenance was changed in him, and his lords were
Astonished. I know. That's that old English. Every once in a while they whoop one out at you, and you know what it means, but it doesn't say it quite the same, does it? All right, so no one can say God isn't hands-on. His hand is right here. He's dealing with this king in a manner in which would get his attention. There was no denying this. In fact, I love this, his loins were loosened and his knees smote one another. I mean, we can all imagine this, can't we? Have you ever been in that situation where your knees were knocking? Woo! Yeah, so it got his attention as this hand wrote. And the king cried out for his astrologers, and the king spake to Babylon. And again, there's that 3rd kingdom, and we'll talk about that. 3rd ruler in the kingdom. Anyway, Belshazzar, yet another king's of Babylon, is consulting Satan's minions. And again, it's the same guys that were unable to give the king any insight, Nebuchadnezzar, any insight into his 2nd dream or his 1st dream. His astrologers knew nothing of what went on that great metallic dream that he had, and they knew nothing, and that was in chapter 2, and they knew nothing of the great tree dream that it was cut down. They knew nothing and couldn't help at all. But again, he consults his wise man of his God. Okay? It makes you kind of wonder who our presidents and leaders consult. Do they ever really pray to God and try to get his guidance out of his word? Does that even occur to some of our leaders?
Not by their actions.
It makes you wonder who, if they aren't consulting God and looking at his God's words, who are they consulting? The wise men of the day? The statisticians that know exactly how we're going to pay this, 1 or 2.1 trillion? I don't even know what it is anymore. Let's all pay that back. We have modern wizards right now and soothsayers and wise men that tell us how we're going to fix all this. I think it's malarkey. They don't know how to fix a $30 trillion debt in the United States. But anyway, I digress. Let's get back to the Word of God here. Third ruler, because his father and co-regent, again, we've discussed him, Nabonidus, still lived, and he was on his religious quest down to the east somewhere. Another god is opposed to the chief god of the city of Babylon. So that's where we get him promising to be the third ruler. Not the second, but the third. So we know that now. Let's move on to Daniel 5:10 through 12. Next reader, please.
Now the queen, by reason of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banquet house, and the queen spake and said, O king, live forever. Let not thy thoughts trouble thee, nor let thy countenance be changed. There is a man in the kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. And in the days of thy father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, was found in him, whom the king Nebuchadnezzar thy father, the king, I say, thy father, made master of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers. For as much as an excellent spirit and knowledge and understanding, interpreting of dreams, and showing of hard sentences, and dissolving of doubts were found in the same, Daniel, whom the king named Belshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation.
Obviously, this is an older lady of wisdom that had seen this all occur before her.
Like Pelosi?
Oh, I get it going all night without hearing that. Anyway, it was the Babylonian custom that whoever the ruling king was, he had the queens, he married them symbolically, probably, to show that it's a continuation of whatever power he had is mine. So, this is a queen either of his father, and it could have been it could have been 20 years, 30 years, 40 years older than him, because again, you were taking in the queens. So this was a very, wise, sage woman that came to give this wisdom. And it kind of makes you wonder, what her lineage was, who she had studied under, who she was listening to, because she essentially had the whole gist of what was going on when Daniel was in the court of Nebuchadnezzar. Of course, this was, 17 years earlier or more. So she was a little bit older, a little bit wiser. She knew her history well, because when you read this, she's got it down. And she knows where the truth came from. But either they don't want to know the truth, because obviously Daniel has been set to the wayside, and he has not been consulted by this Belshazzar. I believe he's been intentionally pushed to the side. I don't see how Belshazzar could have not known who this was, because his grandfather, if this kid is older than it's 17 years before, if he's in his early 20s or something, surely he heard about this somewhere. But I think it's intentional that he ignored him, because he shows here in the next verses, he's aware of a little bit of history, and listen how condescending he is to Daniel as he speaks to him. Next reader, Daniel 5:13 through 16, please.
Then was Daniel brought in before the king, and the king spake, and said unto Daniel, Art thou that Daniel, which art of the children of the captivity of Judah, whom in the king...
You got to say it more condescending. Aren't you the children of... because you could just see it just reeking out of this man, the loathing that he's got. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Try not to go there, Joe.
Yeah, right. Go ahead.
I have even heard of thee, that the spirit of the gods is in thee, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom is found in thee. And now the wise men, the astrologers, have been brought in before me, that they should read this writing, and make known unto the interpretation thereof. But they could not show the interpretation of this thing. And I have heard of thee, that man, I should have read it out of mine. that thou canst make interpretations and dissolve doubts. Now, if thou canst read the writing, and make known to me the interpretation thereof, thou shalt be clothed with scarlet, and have a chain of gold about thy neck, and shalt be in the third ruler in the kingdom.
Amen. All right, so here is this pagan king. He says, hey, I've heard about you, but I've ignored you. And essentially, aren't you from the Jews, those people that we, destroyed and they are captives, 70-ish years ago? You can just kind of feel that. He knew of his grandfather's tale, but he dismissed it. He ignored his grandfather's guidance that we have at the end of chapter 4 that we just all saw. So it's been ignored by him. He knows better. So and again, stop for questions at any time as we move through this. If not, we'll move on to Daniel 5, 17, 20. It's pretty clear what's going on. Next reader, please.
Then Daniel answered and said before the king, let thy gifts be to thyself, and give thy rewards to another. Yet I will read the writing unto the king, and make known to him the interpretation. O thou king, the most high God gave Nebuchadnezzar thy father a kingdom, and majesty, and glory, and honor. And for the majesty that he gave him, all people, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would he slew, and whom he would he kept alive, and whom he would he set up, and whom he would put down. But when his heart was lifted up, his mind hardened in pride, he was disposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him, and he was driven from the sons of men, and his heart was made like the beasts, and his dwelling was with the wild asses. They fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God ruled in the kingdom of men, and that he appointeth over it whomever he will.
All right, so this is a story we just read in Daniel chapter 4, probably occurred around 17-ish, more like 20, 25 years before this. Daniel reminds Belshazzar of something that he already knew. He knew full well, and he opted to ignore it. Similarly, we see most of the world today's lessons that their forefathers taught them in the Bible are ignored. Now Daniel comes forth. How old is he at this time? He's up in his 60s, maybe even his 70s. Remember, he was 12 when he was took from Jerusalem to Babylon. But Daniel has stayed in the higher echelons. They went and got him. They didn't have to go far. But he was just pushed aside. He is no longer ruling over all the wise men at this time, because it was said, who used to rule over the wise men and the soothsayers. So that he stepped down a notch, but he's still reachable, and he's still somewhere to be brought in to this great body of 1,000 drinkers, and that with their mouths agoggle, wondering what is going on. So he was there through the rule of Nebuchadnezzar. And it looks like he was in some capacity through the rule of Nabonidus, and there he was. And he's still there with this third one. Now he is with Belshazzar as well, recognized. Okay, anything else? Again, that's the same story we just read. Nothing unusual there. He's just making sure that this young king understood the past that had gone before this king that he should have been made aware of. All right, next reader, Daniel 5, 22 through 28.
And thou, his son, O Belshazzar, hast not humbled thine heart, though thou knewest all this, but hast lifted up thyself against the Lord of heaven. And they have brought the vessels of his house before thee, and thou and thy lords, thy wives and thy concubines, have drunk wine in them, and thou hast praised the gods of silver and gold, of brass, iron, wood, and stone, which see not, nor hear, nor know, and the God in whose name thy breath is, and whose are all thy ways. hast thou not glorified. Then was the part of the hand sent from him, and this writing was written. And this is the writing that was written.
Many to call uparsin.
This is the interpretation of the thing. Many God hath numbered thy kingdom, and finished it, till thou art weighed in the balances, and art found wanting. Perez, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Perez, thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians.
So, this is powerful. Again, as we saw those spirits earlier from God to go and present judgment upon mankind, this hand is from God specifically to provide this message at this time to this king. And he tells him exactly what he is going to do, what this king did, and he lays it all out. And this also shows God is a person. He can both speak and write. He wrote in Exodus 31:18 when he wrote the laws to Moses. And he did that also twice because, of course, Moses got mad and threw down the laws the first time. So he had to write them. God had to write them again for him. And now he writes this on Belshazzar's palace wall. Now, these are Aramaic words, past participle, already done. So it's finished. It's over. The judgment is made to call, related to the Hebrew shekel. Again, a past participle. And that is, you're weighed in the balance. You have been weighed and judged by God. And Perez, divided, broken by a Persian play of words, uparsin, which is puro. You're broken into pieces. So they failed to remember what kind of God they were dealing with. Are men any different today than these men? Have we forgotten the past? Have we taken the Bible and said, the Bible is no longer valid anymore? We've moved beyond that. We're in the postmodern era now, in the age where, that's just written by a bunch of folks that were desert dwellers, were sheep herders. Why should we listen to them? Most have no concept of the power of God that is presented in the Bible. Even those who read it and are Christians often deny how powerful and sovereign God is. These lessons are here for a purpose, to show the power of God when he is directly involved in the affairs of man. He's not some deist believers who think that he is a watchmaker that sets things up and moves. No, God is active. God is active in the life of every believer. He is influencing with his Holy Spirit mankind to move to his greater purposes, which is the return of his Son, Jesus Christ. First, for his church, and second, to establish his kingdom on earth in the millennial age at the end of the 7-year tribulation period. I doubt if there's hardly anybody in Washington, D.C. anymore, there's some of them out there, that has a true understanding of the God of this book, the Bible. Oh, they might give him some lip service from time to time, but few really know he's in control. There are power-drunk people all over the world who think that they are puffed up. They are like this young king, and they're shaking their fist at God and doing things against God intentionally, on purpose, and they think that will not be called on the carpet. This time, this king was called on the carpet. And no matter when you live, no matter who you are, whether you're a pauper or whether you're a prince, you're all going to stand before God and account for every word that comes out of your mouth, every deed you did, and that ought to scare the hell out of everybody. God is love, but God is judgment as well. And judgment came upon this man, and judgment came upon this kingdom. We saw that parallel already in Revelations 9:20. I did a repeat there. We're going to see a parallel. Let's read this one of Psalms 115, 4 and 8. Next reader, read that, please.
Lord, but our God is in the heavens. He hath done whatsoever he hath pleased. Their idols are silver and gold, the work of men's hands. They have mouths, but they speak not. Eyes have they, but they see not. They have ears, but they hear not. Noses have they, but they smell not. They have hands, but they handle not. Feet have they, but they walk not. Neither speak they through their throat. They that make them are like unto them. So is everyone that trusteth in them.
Okay, it's all just the making of man. All their gods are false gods created by the prince of power of the air of the third earth, which is Satan. So there's God, and then there's the gods of mankind. Don't mistake the two. In the Bible, if you see little gods, that means gods that men have made up, not the gods that are real. All right, next reader, Daniel 5:29 through 31, please.
Then commanded Belshazzar, and they clothed Daniel with scarlet, and put a chain of gold around his neck, and made a proclamation concerning him, that he should be the third ruler of the kingdom. And in that night was Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, slain. And Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62 years old.
Yeah, and his father was, of course, King Cyrus. Thus ends the Babylonian Empire, the great golden head of the statue. The kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians, who were indicated by the silver of Nebuchadnezzar's image, the shoulders. It's this kingdom that will give the Jews permission to go back and rebuild the temple and Jerusalem into the 70-year Babylonian captivity. But it will not be under Darius. It will be under Cyrus, who first does that. Of course, he's the general that was in charge of these forces. Really, Cyrus was over it all. Now, it's magnificent when you consider what God did. Here these princes and lords, thousands of them with their wives and concubines, all in this banquet hall. What happened is the Persian army, they diverted all the water, or some of the water, from the Euphrates River. It lowered the water level. Down beneath, they had a wall built over the Euphrates River, and under it were these iron bars. And when the water level went down, they were able to go underneath that waterway because the water level was lowered. They snuck in, and everyone was in a drinking mood that night. They went in and destroyed them in this banquet hall. If you read the histories, it talks about them going in there and destroying everyone that was in that hall but Daniel. And of course it says here, Daniel clothed with scarlet and put a chain. He didn't want that. He didn't care. He knew that this was all going away. He knew that a new power had come because of this prophecy. I wonder what Daniel was praying. Lord, and and we'll see, he's praying for the Jews to be able to return back to Jerusalem, because that's what the prophet Jeremiah had said would occur, and Daniel knew it would occur. He just probably didn't know it was going to be this night until he was paraded before this king, would-be king, who would end his time that night. So God used Cyrus's army to go and destroy the Babylonian empire in that one night. All the lords in that place were gathered in one place conveniently, and they were wiped out. So all the leadership was wiped out, but the priesthood and the government remained, and then the Medo-Persian Empire took over with the kingdom at that night. Judgment comes from God at just the right time for just his right purpose, so that the Jewish people can return to their homeland. Pretty magnificent stuff, huh? Don't tell me God's not active.